Hurricane Irma live updates. Deaths as Tampa, Miami, Florida hit by storm surges, tornadoes. Hurricane Irma is lashing southwest Florida, threatening tornadoes and a deadly storm surge on the state's east coast. Irma has lost some strength as it travels north along Florida's west coast, and is now a Category 2 hurricane with sustained winds of 177 kilometers per hour. But forecasts warn it will remain a powerful storm as it flooded Miami streets and knocked out power to more than 3 million homes and businesses. The cities and towns of Fort Myers and Tampa are now braced to feel the full effects of the storm in a few hours, after Naples was hit. A storm surge warning has been issued for much of the Florida Peninsula and extended into southern Carolina. The Hurricane Center warned this would bring the risk of dangerous and life-threatening inundation. It stated the threat was highest along Florida's southwest coast and in Florida Keys, where it said the surge is expected to be catastrophic, with 1.5 meters to 3 meters or more expected to inundate much of the island chain. Pray for everybody in Florida," Governor Rick Scott said on Fox News Sunday as some 116,000 people statewide took refuge in shelters. There are fears Tampa is unprepared for the massive wind, rain and storm surge headed its way. All of southern Florida was feeling the storm's effects on Sunday afternoon, with at least 3 killed, a woman forced to deliver her own baby in trees and apartment towers swaying in high winds. TV crews have already caught locals looting in Fort Lauderdale, leading police to their arrests. 9 people were caught by police after a local news station WPLG recorded the group ransacking a vacant sportswear store. Men and women are shown in the video allegedly moving in and out of a broken window, as winds buffet an otherwise empty street and parking lot. Going to prison over a pair of sneakers is a fairly bad life choice, Fort Lauderdale Police Department Chief Rick Maglione said in a statement posted on Twitter. Stay home and look after your loved ones and be thankful they are safe. 2 manatees were stranded after Hurricane Irma sucked the water out of Sarasota Bay, in Florida's Manatee County. Several people posted photos of the mammals, hoping rescue workers or wildlife officials would respond. Michael Seckler posted that the animals were far too massive to be lifted, so they gave them water. Marcelo Clavijo posted that a group of people eventually loaded the manatees onto tarps and dragged them to deeper water. Trump declares major disaster. U.S. President Donald Trump has declared a major disaster in Florida, and ordered federal funds to help the state and NGO recovery work that will begin once the storm allows. He called the storm some big monster as it battered the Florida coast. "The bad news is that this is some big monster," Trump said at the White House. "Right now, we are worried about lives, not cost," he said after returning from Camp David. Earlier, the National Hurricane Center said the storm had maximum sustained winds of 195 kilometers per hour, dropping it to a Category 3, the midpoint of the 5-step Saffir-Simpson scale. The water is starting to rise. Cindy woman Marlise Lapper is riding out the hurricane in her Cape Coral cafe with her husband Yuri and spoke to News Corporation. "The eye of the hurricane is passing us right now," she said. "It's passing to the east of us, not the west. It's taking another turn more to the inland of Florida. We can't see much because all the windows and doors are boarded up with hurricane shutters, and we are also hunkered down in an internal room where it is safest. The howling winds and sound of the rain are incredibly loud. Every now and then one of us goes to see what it looks like outside. The water is starting to rise." A mandatory evacuation order was announced yesterday morning for the area in Cape Coral where we live because it's close to the water. "So we evacuated to the building where the cafe is. This morning we woke up to find the mandatory evacuation area was increased to include the cafe building. We thought about going further north, but to move with 8 people, a dog and a cat is not so easy last minute, so we decided to stay put." Irma had been one of the most powerful hurricanes ever seen in the Atlantic, killing 28 people in the Caribbean and pummeling Cuba with 11 meters waves on Sunday. Its arrival in the U.S. forced one of the largest evacuations in American history. "The biggest thing you can do now is pray," Governor Rick Scott said. makes landfall in Naples and Marco Island. The eye of Hurricane Irma was nearing the city of Naples in South Florida on Sunday afternoon local time. It has already made landfall on nearby Marco Island as a Category 3 hurricane. A 210 km/h wind gust was recorded at Marco Island Emergency Operations Center at about 3 p.m. local time. The National Hurricane Center said Irma had winds of 195 km/h and was centered 30 km south of Naples on Sunday afternoon. It was moving north at 19 km/h. At that rate, the center of the storm should come ashore sometime between 4 and 5 p.m. local time. A storm surge of 2.7 meters to 4.5 meters above ground level was reported there, according to the New York Times. Tampa about to get punched. The storm has pushed water out of a bay in Tampa, but forecasters are telling people not to venture out there, because it's going to return with a potentially deadly vengeance. Fears grew how Tampa would deal with the storm after a July analysis by the Washington Post concluded that the area is due for a major hurricane, and is not prepared. If a big one scores a direct hit, the damage would likely surpass Katrina. According to the report, Tampa the most vulnerable city in United States to a hurricane. Lario resident William Jong told News.com, "Oh, the mood was tense, that everyone was just waiting. It's like someone has dropped a glass and everyone's just watching it fall to the ground," he said. "No one is outside. All the businesses in the area are closed, half since yesterday, and all the gas stations have been out of gasoline for a couple of days." Mr. Jong had elected to stay in Largo in the Tampa Bay area and directly in Irma's path to help his parents reinforce their house. He said his concrete apartment building should be very safe from the worst effects of the hurricane and that many of his elderly neighbors had opted to remain. He said judging from the number of cars parked in his area, only a quarter of the residents of the surrounding buildings have fled. While there has been no flooding yet, Mr. Jong's building is in a flood zone. The power is already fluctuating, but he said the real concerns will be when the power and water is cut off. Tampa's mayor, Bob Buckhorn, declared indefinite curfew in Florida City starting at 6 p.m. local time. Mr. Buckhorn delivered a stark warning online for everyone in one of Florida's most densely populated regions. Buckhorn has announced a 6 p.m. mandatory curfew. "We know we are ground zero for this storm. We have avoided it for 90 winds, but our time has come to be ready," he wrote on Twitter. "We are about to get punched in the face by this storm." On Bayshore Boulevard in Tampa, approximately 100 people were walking Sunday afternoon on what was Old Tampa Bay, a body of water near downtown. Hurricane Irma's winds and low tide have pushed the water unusually far from its normal position. Some people are venturing as far as 180 meters out to get to the water's new edge. The water is normally about 1 meter to 1.5 meters deep and reaches a seawall. Miami battered as cranes collapse. While residents on Florida's west coast are bracing themselves for the devastating eye of the hurricane, which could generate 4.5 meters walls of water, the east coast is being threatened by a series of twisters. Indeed, a fast-moving tornado has been reported to be seen on the ground at Fort Lauderdale International Airport, The Sun reports. In Miami, the storm downed 2 cranes in the city's downtown, with social media footage capturing the terrifying moment one of them toppled. The city, given a last-moment reprieve from the worst of the storm, is suffering major electricity cuts as winds while the downtown area of the city is submerged with floodwaters. Waves poured over a Miami seawall, flooding streets a couple of blocks from the waterfront through the financial district and past consulates, leaving high-rise apartment buildings standing like islands in the flood. Police sheriff among dead. The storm has so far claimed 3 confirmed victims. A Florida sheriff's deputy helping out at a shelter and a corrections officer on his way to work were killed in a head-on crash, according to the Miami Herald. Hardee County Sheriff's Deputy Julie Bridges, a mom of 1 and officer for the past 18 years, crashed at 6:30 a.m. Sunday at Zolfo Springs, about 100 kilometers from Sarasota. Sergeant Joseph Osman was killed as he drove in to start his shift at Hardee County Correctional Institute. Another man was killed after winds caused him to lose control of the truck he was driving through Monroe County, which contains Key West. He had been carrying a generator, local officials told ABC News. Neighboring Georgia at risk. Some 6.5 million people, about a third of the state's population, had been ordered to evacuate southern Florida. However, the impact of the storm could be felt in the neighboring state of Georgia, with a tropical storm warning issued for Atlanta, the first time that has happened in the city's history. The warning means that tropical storm conditions are expected within the next 36 hours. Peak winds were expected to reach 48 to 64 kilometers per hour with gusts of up to 88 kilometers per hour. Hurricane Irma battering Florida Peninsula as its core moves toward Tampa. Extremely dangerous. Hurricane Irma first crashed into the Florida Keys on Sunday morning and then made a second landfall on Marco Island on Florida's west coast Sunday afternoon, unleashing violent wind gusts up to 142 miles per hour and storm surge flooding. As the powerful storm scoots up Florida's west coast into this evening, forecasters fear that this storm will go down as one of the worst in the state's history. At 9 p.m., the storm was centered 35 miles east-northeast of Fort Myers. Its eye wall, containing the storm's most violent winds, had pushed northwest of Port Charlotte. The storm center was headed north at 14 miles per hour toward the west side of Sarasota and Tampa, where wind gusts of 75 to 100 miles per hour were possible through around midnight. South to north, ocean levels were rising quickly in southwest Florida as the storm center lifted north. In Naples, the storm surge raised water levels 8 feet in 2 hours, between about 4:30 and 6:30 p.m., before stabilizing by around 8 p.m. But waters were just starting to rise or had yet to begin their rapid rise from Fort Myers northward. Irma's peak winds of 105 miles per hour, with higher gusts, had dropped 20 miles per hour from the morning, making it a Category 2 hurricane, down from a Category 4. Even with slow weakening likely to continue as the storm passes over land, Irma remains very serious and life-threatening. The National Hurricane Center said it is expected to remain a hurricane through Monday morning. Coastal waters could well above normally dry land along Florida's central Gulf Coast, inundating homes, businesses and roads, an imminent danger, according to the Hurricane Center. Because of the storm's magnitude, the entire state of Florida is being severely affected by damaging winds, torrential rains and, in many areas, the risk of tornadoes. Tropical storm and hurricane conditions were also predicted to spread into the Florida Panhandle, eastern Alabama, much of Georgia and southern South Carolina by Monday. Central Florida. Irma's eye wall should pass on the west side of Sarasota between 9:30 and 10:30 p.m. or so, and then on the west side of Tampa through around midnight, potentially producing wind gusts between 75 and 100 miles per hour. Once Irma's center passes north of Sarasota and Tampa Sunday night, the seas will rise, resulting in areas of coastal inundation. On Florida's interior and even the east coast, tropical storm force winds and hurricane force gusts were fairly widespread Sunday evening. Orlando clocked a gust to 79 miles per hour on that street. Lucy, on the east coast, a gust reached 99 miles per hour. Southwest Florida. The worst winds had passed this region just prior to 9:30 p.m., but gusty showers continued on the storm's backside. Irma's eye wall passed through Fort Myers and Cape Coral just before 7 p.m., producing wind gusts of 88 and 101 miles per hour, and then passed on the west side of Port Charlotte between 8 and 9 p.m. As the eye wall moved over Naples late Sunday afternoon, it reported sustained winds of 93 miles per hour and a gust to 142 miles per hour, the strongest recorded from this storm in the U.S. Josh Morgerman, a hurricane chaser positioned in Naples, described the scene. Went through violent, destructive winds, screaming, whiteout, wreckage blowing by and fog. Then the eye moved overhead. Before the arrival of the storm center, water was actually retreating from Naples to Tampa due to offshore winds from the east pulling the sea back. But forecasters warned residents that shortly after the storm center passed to the north and winds blew back onshore, waters would rush back and rapidly causing severe inundation. In Naples, as of 7 p.m., water levels were about 4 feet above normally dry land, but the level was starting to stabilize around 8 p.m. In Fort Myers, water's levels were rising at 9 p.m., but not as dramatically as they had in Naples. Southeast Florida. In Southeast Florida, spiral bands continued to unleash tropical storm force winds. Even into the evening, Winds were gusting up to 60 to 75 miles per hour around Miami and West Palm Beach, 7 p.m. Gust of 75 miles per hour, but they weren't as strong as earlier. In the afternoon, sustained winds in Miami and Fort Lauderdale reached 50 to 60 miles per hour through the early afternoon, gusting as high as 80 to 100 miles per hour. Miami International Airport clocked a gust to 94 miles per hour and an isolated gust hit 100 miles per hour at the University of Miami. Also during the afternoon, the seas had risen several feet above normally dry land. Social media photos and videos showed water pouring through Miami's streets, in between high-rises, amid sideways sheets of rains. While the core of the storm and worst winds passed the Keys early Sunday morning, the Weather Service warned storm surge flooding was ongoing as winds on the storm's backside shoved water over the islands. Gusts still reached 50 to 60 miles per hour as of 7:45 p.m. Early Sunday afternoon, the maximum surge at Cujo Key was estimated at 10 feet. Statewide, about 3 million customers were without power. Particularly in South and Central Florida, torrential rain was falling, with widespread totals of 6 to 10 inches and pockets up to 10 to 14 inches. Numerous flash flood warnings had been issued. As the storm's spiral bands walloped central and northern Florida, the potential for tornadoes arose in the swirling air, and the Weather Service issued watches and scores of warnings. Storm warnings in effect and predicted surge height and winds. Hurricane warnings cover all of Florida except the western panhandle, where a tropical storm warning was in effect. A storm surge warning was also issued for much of the Florida Peninsula, except for a small section from North Miami Beach to Jupiter Inlet, and even extended up the Georgia coast into southern South Carolina. The Hurricane Center said that this would bring the risk of dangerous and life-threatening inundation and that the threat was highest along Florida's southwest coast and in the Florida Keys, where it said the surge is expected to be catastrophic. Because of the shift in the most likely storm track to the west, Miami and southeast Florida were most likely to miss the storm's intensely destructive core, known as the eye wall, where winds are strongest. Even so, because of Irma's enormous size, the entire Florida Peninsula and even the Panhandle were likely to witness damaging winds. The National Hurricane Center warned that the storm would bring life-threatening wind impacts to much of the state. Effects on Florida. Conditions will continue to deteriorate Sunday night over Florida and the central and north part of the state as Irma chugs up the coast. Conditions will slowly improve to the south. Through around midnight, Sarasota and Tampa would face the storm's brunt. Here's a guide to what is most likely and where. Key West, Key Largo. Time frame for worst conditions. Through Sunday afternoon. Hazard threats, wind, storm surge and rain. Wind gusts of up to 50 to 70 miles per hour should continue into the evening. A catastrophic storm surge of 5 to 10 feet or more is expected to inundate much of the island chain. Heavy rain will add to the water issues, as anywhere from 5 to 10 inches of additional rain will fall before the worst of the storm is over. Unfortunately, the damage potential on the Keys could be landscape-altering after taking a direct hit from this storm. Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach. Time frame for worst conditions. Through Sunday night. Hazard threats, strong winds, tornadoes, heavy rain. Sustained winds of 45 to 70 miles per hour with gusts of 80+ mile per hour will last well into Sunday evening. Swirling winds at all levels of the atmosphere have also increased the chances of tornadoes developing at any point on Sunday, especially in locations right along the water. Rainfall totals of 4 to 8 inches or more are expected on Sunday alone, which may exacerbate localized flooding. With Irma's last-minute track shift to the west, the storm surge won't be as big of a concern here as it is elsewhere, with a 2 to 4 foot surge expected along much of Florida's east coast. Naples, Fort Myers, Tampa Bay, St. Petersburg. Time frame for worst conditions. Through Monday morning. Hazard threats, storm surge and wind. Irma's ultimate destination will be along the west coast of Florida. This means the conditions will deteriorate rapidly from Naples to Tampa Bay throughout Sunday afternoon. However, Irma's path will take it parallel to the west coast of Florida, keeping the entire region engulfed in the dangerous northeast quadrant of the storm. where winds are strongest. Sustained hurricane-force winds and gusts over 100 miles per hour should arrive in Naples Sunday afternoon and up to 75 to 100 miles per hour in St. Petersburg, Tampa Bay between 10 p.m. and midnight or so. The most dangerous hazard for this region will be the extreme storm surge. Nowhere in the entire state will the storm surge levels be higher than along the Gulf-facing coast, with storm surge totals of 8 to 12 feet and locally up to 15 feet forecast. Any coastal city from Tampa Bay south to Naples is at risk, with historic flooding, the likes of which haven't been seen in this area since Hurricane Donna in 1960, threatening thousands of people and structures. Orlando, Central Florida. Time frame for worst conditions, Sunday night through Monday morning. Hazard threats, wind, rain, and tornadoes. Inland areas won't escape the effects of Irma. The storm is extremely large in size, with tropical storm force winds extending outward over 200 miles from the center. The wind speeds in Central Florida and the Orlando area will start to pick up by late Sunday afternoon, with sustained winds of 40 to 60 miles per hour and gusts of 70+ miles per hour lasting from late Sunday night through Monday morning. Heavy rain will also cause problems, with a general 6 to 12+ inches of rain expected by the time the storm is over. The threat of tornadoes will increase by Sunday night, as well, as the storm center tracks north along the west coast of Florida. Jacksonville, Daytona Beach. Time frame for worst conditions, Sunday evening through Monday afternoon. Hazard threats, rain, tornadoes, wind. The northeast portion of Florida will be spared the worst of Irma but won't escape unscathed. Sustained tropical force winds of 40 to 55 miles per hour will overspread the area from Daytona Beach to Jacksonville by Sunday evening, with the worst winds, gusts up to 70 miles per hour, occurring overnight. Heavy rain will be a storyline here as 6 to 10+ inches of rain is expected to fall in a relatively short period. As with other parts of the state, the tornado threat will peak overnight on Sunday as Irma's storm center tracks northward. Storm surge values will be elevated, 2 to 4 feet, but should result in only minor to moderate coastal flooding. Potential effects on Georgia and the southeastern United States. Georgia/Atlanta/South Carolina. Time frame for worst conditions, Monday morning through Tuesday morning. Hazard threats, wind, rain and, at the coast, storm surge. Hurricane warnings extend well into Georgia, covering over half of the state. Parts of southern South Carolina also are under a hurricane warning, with Irma poised to maintain its hurricane force strength for several hours after landfall. Sustained tropical force winds of 25 to 45 miles per hour will spread over Georgia from south to north starting late Sunday night. The strongest sustained winds, 40 to 50 miles per hour, with gusts of 60+ miles per hour will move in on early Monday morning, lasting through Monday evening. This includes Atlanta, which is under a tropical storm warning, where sustained winds of 25 to 40 miles per hour with gusts up to 60 miles per hour will occur from about 10 p.m. Sunday night to about 5 p.m. Monday afternoon. This could lead to downed trees and outages. Heavy rain is also expected, with storm totals of 6 to 10 inches forecast, the bulk of which should fall Monday. Storm surge along the Georgia, South Carolina coast will be a hazard, as well, with the Hurricane Center predicting a surge of 4 to 6 feet. Of particular concern is the duration of the storm surge. Persistent onshore winds will extend the surge component here, with elevated water levels potentially lasting up to 36 hours. Irma's path so far. At 3:35 p.m. Sunday, Irma had made its second U.S. landfall of the day over Marco Island, where a wind gust of 130 miles per hour was reported. Earlier, the storm officially made its initial U.S. landfall at Cujo Key at 9:10 a.m. As a Category 4 hurricane. Winds over the Keys raged, gusting to at least 94 miles per hour in Key West, before the wind instrument failed, and up to 120 miles per hour in Big Pine Key. Witness video showed the rising storm surge flooding Key West streets. Before its encounter with the Keys, Irma made landfall on the north coast of Cuba as a Category 5 hurricane just after 9 p.m. Friday, with maximum sustained winds of 160 miles per hour. It became that country's first Category 5 hurricane since 1924. Fueled by the extremely warm ocean temperatures, Irma re-intensified to the maximum hurricane classification level after weakening slightly on Friday afternoon. As it scraped Cuba's north coast early Saturday, it produced a sustained wind gust of 118 miles per hour, and a gust to 159 miles per hour was reported at Faya, Cuba, in the eye wall of the hurricane. On Friday, before making landfall along Cuba's north-central coast, Irma passed north of Haiti and then between Cuba's northeast coast and the central Bahamas. Thursday evening, the center of the storm passed very close to the Turks and Caicos, producing potentially catastrophic Category 5 winds. The storm surge was of particular concern, as the water had the potential to rise 16 to 20 feet above normally dry land in coastal sections north of the storm center, causing extreme inundation. A devastating storm surge and destructive winds had also probably battered the southeastern Bahamas, near Great Inagua Island. Through early Thursday, the storm had battered islands from Puerto Rico to the northern Lesser Antilles. While the center of Irma passed just north of Puerto Rico late Wednesday, a wind gust of 63 miles per hour was clocked in San Juan early Wednesday evening, and more than 900,000 people were reported to be without power. In Culebra, Puerto Rico, a small island 17 miles east of the main island, a wind gust registered 111 miles per hour in the afternoon. On Wednesday afternoon, the storm's eye had moved over Virgin Gorda in the British Virgin Islands, and its southern eye wall raked St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Early Wednesday afternoon, a wind gust to 131 miles per hour was clocked on Buck Island and 87 miles per hour on St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. On Tuesday night and Wednesday morning, the hurricane passed directly over Barbuda and St. Martin in the northern Leeward Islands, the strongest hurricane recorded in that region, and tied with the 1935 Florida Keys hurricane as the strongest Atlantic storm to strike land. As Barbuda took a direct hit, the weather station there clocked a wind gust to 155 miles per hour before it went offline. The storm also passed directly over Anguilla and St. Martin early Wednesday, causing severe damage. Irma's place in history. Irma's peak intensity, 185 miles per hour, ranks among the strongest in recorded history, exceeding the likes of Katrina, Andrew and Camille, whose winds peaked at 175 miles per hour. Among the most intense storms on record, it trails only Hurricane Allen in 1980, which had winds of 190 miles per hour. It is tied for second most intense with Hurricane Wilma in 2005, Hurricane Gilbert in 1988 and the 1935 Florida Keys hurricane. The storm maintained maximum wind speeds of at least 180 miles per hour for 37 hours, longer than any storm on Earth on record, passing Super Typhoon Haiyan, the previous record holder, 24 hours. Late Tuesday, its pressure dropped to 914 millibars. The lower the pressure, the stronger the storm, ranking as the lowest of any storm on record outside the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico in the Atlantic Basin. The storm has generated the most accumulated cyclone energy, a measure of a storm's duration and intensity, of any hurricane on record. Irma's landfall pressure of 929 millibars in the Florida Keys was the lowest for any U.S. landfalling hurricane since Katrina, 920 millibars, and for a Florida landfall since Andrew, 922 millibars. It ranks as the seventh lowest pressure of any U.S. landfalling storm. When Irma crashed into the Keys early Sunday as a Category 4, following Hurricane Harvey's assault in Texas, it marked the first time on record that two Category 4 storms had made landfall in the United States in the same year. Capital Weather Gang hurricane expert Brian McNulty contributed to this report. Credit to tropical weather expert and occasional Capital Weather Gang contributor Phil Klotzbach for some of the statistics in this section.